Backyard barbecue. Kids running, laughter thick in the heat. Margaret leans toward the neighbor, voice low, but not low enough. Poor things. Emily can't keep a husband. Those kids don't stand a chance. They'll crack just like she did. Emily stands 10 feet away with a plate of watermelon. She hears every word. She's heard them all her life. The smile stays glued to her face, even as something inside splits down the center. She walks over, slow, and sets the plate in front of her mother. "Careful, Mom," she says, sweet as poison. "Keep talking like that, and you'll learn how quiet a house gets when your only daughter finally stops coming home." The neighbor's face drains. Margaret opens her mouth, and for the first time in 50 years, nothing comes out. One whisper too many, and one mother about to learn what abandonment really tastes like. Whisper your mother-in-law's name 3 times, now. Hadn't even lifted his gaze, but his fingers twisted the hem of his shirt, a silent knot tightening in the oppressive afternoon light. She'd come out here to fetch the laundry from the line, the sheets still warm and faintly scented with lavender from the wash, their softness now a mocking contrast to the chill creeping up her spine. Now the basket dangled forgotten from her arm, its weight pulling at her like an anchor dragging her deeper into dread. How long had this been going on? Whispers slithering through the neighborhood, Margaret's concern twisting into something sharper, more venomous, like roots burrowing into soft earth. Emily's chest tightened, a slow coil of nausea rising as she pieced it together. The sidelong glances at the school gates, the way Mrs. Hargrove's smile had faltered last week during coffee, its warmth curdling into pity. David cleared his throat, finally, the sound rough in the thick air. "Mother, that's not fair." Emily's doing her best. Margaret's lips pursed, the lines around her mouth deepening like cracks in parched, unforgiving earth. "Best? David, dear, I've seen it. The children's clothes unkempt, meals thrown together. It's not criticism, it's worry. For the family." Her eyes flicked toward the house, as if she sensed the shadows stirring within, but she pressed on, voice dropping conspiratorially, laced with a subtle poison. "If you don't step in, who will? I only want what's right for you all." Mrs. Hargrove nodded, her earrings glinting coldly as she leaned forward, the movement stirring the faint, cloying scent of her rosewater perfume. "Families need guidance. You're wise to speak up, Margaret." Emily's breath came shallow, the air in the sunroom thick with the musty undertone of potted ferns, and the faint, acrid tang of her own rising sweat, clinging to her skin like accusation. She wanted to burst out, to shatter the illusion with words sharp as shattered glass. Lies, all of it lies. But her feet rooted to the spot, the old resentment bubbling up, hot and paralyzing, its heat warring with the chill of isolation. Confronting Margaret meant fracturing David, pulling him between loyalties he so desperately avoided. Her drive to shield this fragile harmony warred with the urge to claim her ground, to scream that she wouldn't dissolve under these veiled barbs, not without a fight. David shifted, his voice muffled, appeasing, swallowed by the weight of expectation. "We'll talk to her. Just keep it between us, okay?" The neighbor's reply blurred into the rustle of leaves as a breeze stirred the hedges, carrying the faint, earthy scent of impending rain. But Emily heard enough. The peace she'd nurtured, the careful independence she'd carved in this house, cracked open like an eggshell under relentless pressure. Dread seeped in, cold and insistent, pooling in her gut like icy water. What else had Margaret sown in the soil of this street? And how long before the roots choked everything she'd built? She backed away, the basket swinging against her leg with a dull thud. Each step a deliberate retreat into the dim interior, where the walls pressed close and the silence amplified her pulse, echoing like a distant, unyielding heartbeat. The words slithered through the fence like shadows lengthening at dusk, coiling around Emily's chest as she paused in the garden, shears forgotten in her grip, their metal handles slick with the damp chill of twilight. Suspicion bloomed in the dim corners of her mind, a cold dread that her mother-in-law's whispers had poisoned the air further than she'd imagined. tainting every breath with doubt. That evening, alone in the dim kitchen light, she paced the linoleum, breaths measured and ragged, piecing together a calm facade to pierce the veil of secrets. But the shadows clung, unrelenting. Too soft, you know? Emily thinks a little leniency goes a long way. But look where it's gotten us. Margaret's voice carried from the kitchen, sharp as the clink of teacups she arranged on the counter. Her back turned to the doorway where Emily paused, one hand still on the frame, the wood rough under her fingers. The scent of oversteeped chamomile hung thick in the air, cloying and bitter, mingling with the faint, acrid tang of burnt toast from breakfast, lingering on the counters like a stale regret. Emily's pulse quickened, not from anger yet, but from the way those words slithered into her ears like an unwelcome secret unearthed, burrowing deep. David shifted in his chair at the table, his fork scraping idly against a half-eaten plate of eggs, the sound grating in the heavy quiet, eyes flicking between his mother and the empty space where Emily would soon appear. He cleared his throat, soft and tentative, a hesitant bridge in the thickening tension. "Mother, that's not fair. Emily's doing her best with the kids." Margaret pivoted slowly, a porcelain smile cracking her lined face, her fingers lingering on the saucer as if anchoring herself against the undercurrent of discord. "Best? Darling, I've seen how things unravel when no one's firm at the helm. Remember your cousin? Spoiled rotten and now he's adrift. I only want what's right for our family." Her eyes, pale and unyielding, darted toward the doorway, as if she'd sensed Emily's shadow there all along, lurking in the dim light. Emily stepped forward, her bare feet silent on the cool linoleum, the chill seeping up through her soles like a warning from the house itself. She'd rehearsed this in her mind upstairs. Calm words, measured tones, no raised voices to fracture the fragile morning light filtering through the lace curtains, casting ghostly patterns on the walls. But now, hearing Margaret weave that narrative again, doubt coiled in her gut, slow and insidious, twisting like smoke. Was this just concern, or something sharper? A probe testing the edges of her control. "Margaret," she said, voice steady despite the knot tightening in her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. "I overheard you outside with Mrs. Hargrove. About the children. About me." Margaret's smile held, but her knuckles whitened around the teapot handle, the porcelain creaking faintly under the pressure. "Overheard? Oh, Emily dear, neighbors talk. I was just sharing thoughts, nothing more. Sit down, have some tea. It's gone cold waiting for you." David's gaze lifted, pleading in its hesitation. His shoulders hunched as if bracing for the inevitable pull between them, the air growing heavier with each passing second. He wanted this smoothed over, the air cleared without ripples spreading to the kids' rooms upstairs, where innocent dreams slumbered unaware. It's probably nothing. Mum means well." But Emily didn't sit. She crossed her arms, feeling the soft cotton of her blouse pull taut, the fabric suddenly too confining against her skin, trapping the heat of rising resentment. "Well?" The word echoed in her thoughts, laced with a suspicion that bloomed slow and insidious, like mold in hidden corners. Margaret's suggestions had started innocently enough. Hint about discipline, meal plans, the house's endless dust. But now they felt like fingers prying at the seams of her life, cold and insistent. What else had she said to the neighbors? What judgments lingered behind those closed doors, painting Emily as the careless wife, the unfit mother? "It doesn't feel like nothing," Emily replied, her words deliberate, each one measured against the rising tide of unease that lapped at her resolve. "These comments, they're crossing a line. I need you to stop." Margaret poured the tea anyway, the steam curling lazily upward, veiling her expression for a heartbeat, carrying the bitter herbal scent that now soured in Emily's nostrils. "Crossing a line? I'm family, Emily. I care. If you can't see that, perhaps it's you who's building walls." Her tone dipped, almost soothing, yet it carried that undercurrent, a subtle shift that made Emily's skin prickle with unease. Care or control? The question hung unspoken, feeding the dread that this conversation, meant to mend, might only widen the cracks, irreparably. David reached out a hand toward Emily, then let it fall, the motion heavy with defeat. "Let's not overthink it," he murmured. But his voice wavered, the passivity in it only sharpening her resolve, and her wariness, like a blade honed in silence. Margaret watched them both, her eyes gleaming with something unreadable, the kitchen closing in around the silence that followed, walls echoing with the weight of what remained unsaid. Emily lingered in the doorway, the sharp edge of Margaret's words slicing through the air like a gathering storm, her pulse quickening with an insidious dread that clawed at her insides. The kitchen's dim light cast long shadows across the tiled floor, amplifying the oppressive weight of judgment that isolated her further, each flicker of the bulb a reminder of her entrapment. Hesitation gripped her limbs, every breath shallow, as the unspoken confrontation loomed, her thoughts fracturing under the slow, suffocating pressure of misunderstanding, and the fear of what it might unleash. "Why are you standing there like that, Emily? Come in, join us. We're just talking about the boy." Margaret's voice sliced through the steam rising from the teapot, her eyes locking onto Emily's from across the kitchen table with unblinking intensity. The cups sat in precise rows, saucers aligned like soldiers awaiting orders, the faint scent of chamomile clinging to the air like an unwelcome embrace, thick and suffocating. Emily stepped forward, her socked feet silent on the linoleum, but her pulse thudded in her ears, louder than the tick of the wall clock, each second dragging like a chain. David shifted in his chair, his fork pausing midway to his mouth, a half-eaten slice of toast crumbling under his grip, flakes scattering like fragile defenses. "Mother, maybe we can—" "Oh, David, don't fuss." Margaret waved a hand, her rings catching the dim overhead light in cold flashes. She turned fully to Emily now, her smile thin, lips painted a shade too red for the hour, the color stark against her pallor. "You heard me earlier, didn't you? About the discipline. I only meant it as advice. You've been so good with little Tommy, but that softness, it's leaving him unprepared for the world." Emily's throat tightened as she pulled out a chair, the wood scraping against the floor in a low groan that reverberated through her bones. She wanted to say it wasn't softness, it was love, boundaries that bent without breaking, but the words stuck, lodged like thorns. "I appreciate the concern, Margaret, but Tommy's fine. He's responding well to our approach. We don't need to change everything." Margaret leaned forward, her fingers interlacing over the tablecloth, nails tapping a rhythm that echoed Emily's growing unease, each click a nail in her composure. "Our approach? Dear, when you say we, you mean you, don't you? David here knows better. He grew up with structure. Remember how I handled his tantrums? Firm, but fair. You're twisting this into some attack on your way, but I'm just suggesting a little guidance. Why make it sound like I'm the enemy?" David cleared his throat, eyes darting between them, his plate now a mess of uneaten crumbs that mocked the facade of normalcy. "Emily's right, Mother. It's working. Let's not—" "See?" Margaret interrupted, her gaze sharpening on Emily like a blade unsheathed. "Even David hesitates. You're putting him in the middle, making him choose sides when all I want is to help. If you can't see that, perhaps you're the one being unreasonable." Emily's chest constricted, the room's walls pressing in with the weight of unspoken histories. Margaret's widowed years, her grip on the family home before they moved in, now a noose tightening around them all. She glanced at David, searching for alliance, but he only stared at his hands, knuckles whitening around his napkin, the fabric twisting like her fraying nerves. The suggestion hung there, innocent on the surface, yet it burrowed deeper, twisting her defense into doubt that gnawed relentlessly. Was she unreasonable? The thought coiled in her gut, cold and insistent, as Margaret poured tea with deliberate calm, the liquid steaming like a veiled threat, its heat mirroring the slow burn within. Emily forced a nod, her voice barely above a whisper, cracking under the strain. I didn't mean it that way." But inside, isolation bloomed, sharp as thorns. David's silence a betrayal. Margaret's control an unyielding shadow that darkened every corner. Dread seeped through her veins, slow and poisonous, whispering that this fracture was only the beginning, her family slipping from her grasp, one twisted word at a time. Emily lingered in the doorway, the chamomile's cloying sweetness turning sour in her throat, Margaret's gaze a weight pressing down like damp fog that seeped into her bones. Hours blurred into the evening's heavy silence, the kitchen's warmth curdling into something colder, more confining, the shadows deepening with each passing minute. Resentment coiled tighter in her chest, a slow ember igniting against the endless expectations that smothered her. By the dim light of the sitting room, as demands for the family's meticulously ordered days pressed in once more, she felt the shift, a defiant resolve hardening, unyielding, beneath the oppressive air that choked the life from the house. Emily crossed the threshold and pulled out a chair, the wooden legs scraping against the linoleum, with a deliberate grind that echoed her inner turmoil. She sat without invitation, her palms flat on the table's edge, eyes fixed on the teapot's spout, where a final wisp of steam curled like a fading accusation, dissipating into the stale air. Margaret paused mid-sip, her cup hovering inches from her lips, the porcelain edge catching the dim light from the overhead bulb in a ghostly gleam. "There you are. I was just telling David we need to sort out the week's plans. The boys' school runs, your shifts. It's all a muddle if we don't align them properly." Her voice carried that familiar lilt, smooth as polished stone, but laced with the undercurrent of command that brooked no argument. She set the cup down with precision, aligning it exactly with the saucer, her gaze flicking to David for affirmation, expecting his silent nod. David shifted in his seat, fork midway to his mouth from the half-eaten slice of toast on his plate. Crumbs dusted the tablecloth like scattered evidence of crumbling resolve. "Mom's right, Em. It'd make things easier if we shared the calendar." "No big deal." His words tumbled out soft, conciliatory, his free hand drumming a silent rhythm on his knee beneath the table, betraying the unease twisting within. Emily's fingers curled slightly against the cool wood, the faint residue of dish soap from her earlier chores clinging to her skin like a reminder of her endless labors. The kitchen smelled of overbrewed chamomile, now turning bitter, mingling with the faint, metallic tang of the radiator humming in the corner, its low drone vibrating through the floor like a harbinger of tension. She could feel the weight of Margaret's expectations pressing in, the way her mother-in-law's suggestions always bloomed into necessities, eroding the boundaries Emily had fought to draw since moving back into this house, each one a slow erosion of her will. The resentment simmered low in her chest, a slow, uncoiling serpent, fed by months of rewritten grocery lists and unsolicited advice on bedtime routines that haunted her nights. "I've got it handled," Emily said, her voice steady, threading through the steam that still lingered like a veil. She didn't look away, meeting Margaret's eyes directly for the first time that evening, the contact electric with unspoken challenge. "The schedule's set. School pickup at 3, my shift ends at 6. We don't need to revisit it every night." Margaret's smile didn't falter, but her eyelids narrowed fractionally, the lines around her mouth deepening like cracks in dry earth under strain. "Handled? Dear, that's what you said last week, and then the boy missed his play date because you forgot to confirm with the neighbors. I'm only thinking of the family. Efficiency keeps us all sane." She reached for the notepad beside the teapot, flipping it open to a page filled with her neat, looping script. Meal times, errands, even Emily's yoga class slotted in as an afterthought, its margins crowded with corrections. The pen tapped once, twice, against the paper, a metronome of insistence that set Emily's teeth on edge. David cleared his throat, setting his fork down with a soft clink that pierced the quiet. "Em, come on. It's just sharing. Mom's trying to help." His eyes darted between them, pleading, the stress etching faint shadows under his brows, like bruises from an invisible fight. He hated this, the pull between his wife's quiet fire and his mother's unyielding grip. But saying more would only fan the flames he dreaded, leaving him scorched in the middle. The air in the kitchen thickened, the radiator's hum growing louder in the silence that followed, vibrating through the floorboards up into Emily's bones, amplifying her unease. She stared at the notepad, at the way Margaret's handwriting overwrote her own life in ink, black and indelible, and the serpent twisted tighter, its coils squeezing her resolve. No more. "Help!" Emily echoed, the word tasting sharp on her tongue, bitter as the cooling tea. "I appreciate the concern, Margaret, but this is our family, our schedule. I'll manage it my way." She pushed the chair back an inch, the scrape echoing like a line drawn in the sand, her pulse a steady thrum against the oppressive quiet that pressed down like a shroud. Margaret's pen stilled. For a beat, the room held its breath, the chamomile's bitterness now a full-fledged ache in the throat, lingering like regret. David's fork lay abandoned, his face paling as the rift he'd feared cracked open before him, its edges jagged and unforgiving. Emily held her ground, the resentment blooming into something fiercer, a quiet rebellion against the invisible chains tightening around her home, each link forged in silence and expectation. Days bled into one another, the sting of that kitchen confrontation festering like an untreated wound, raw and throbbing beneath the surface. Emily moved through her routines, in a thickening fog of helplessness, each glance from her spouse carrying the faint echo of Margaret's calculated whispers, their chill seeping into her marrow. Doubt coiled in the air, unseen tendrils wrapping tighter, until the evening of the family dinner loomed, an oppressive ritual where buried resentment simmered, ready to boil over in the dim glow of the chandelier, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters. The teacup rattled in David's saucer, spilling a thin rivulet of amber liquid across the lace doily, as Margaret's voice sliced through the kitchen's stifling hush like a scalpel. "See? Even the simplest things turn to chaos when left unchecked." Her eyes, sharp as tarnished silver, flicked toward Emily, who remained seated at the table's far end, the steam from the teapot now fully dissipated into the room's thickening warmth, leaving only a cloying residue. David cleared his throat, dabbing at the spill with a napkin that absorbed the stain like a reluctant confession, the fabric darkening under his touch. He hadn't looked at Emily since she'd pulled out that chair, his fork hovering over his untouched plate of roast chicken, congealing under the dim overhead light, its juices pooling like accusation. The aroma of overcooked herbs clung to the air, heavy and accusatory, mingling with the faint metallic tang of unspoken grievances that hung between them. Margaret leaned forward, her pearl necklace swaying like a pendulum marking time's inexorable march, and placed a hand on David's arm. Gentle, possessive, her touch lingering like a claim. "Darling, you've always been the one to notice these little oversights. Remember how your father and I managed things? Order, that's what kept us together." Emily's fingers curled into the edge of the tablecloth, the coarse weave biting into her skin like tiny teeth. But she said nothing. The words she'd rehearsed in the mirror that afternoon, firm, reclaiming, dissolved now under the weight of Margaret's gaze, heavy and unblinking. David's shoulders slumped further, his drive to placate warring with the knot of doubt Margaret had tied earlier in the pantry, her whispers about Emily's forgetfulness with the children's schedules, the way she'd let things slide since the move, each syllable a thread tightening the noose. "It's just concern, David," Margaret had murmured, her voice a velvet trap that ensnared him. "She means well, but families need structure. You wouldn't want the boys growing up scattered, would you?" Now, at the dinner table, the manipulation bloomed into full discord, its petals sharp and thorns hidden. David set down his fork with a soft clink that echoed too loudly in the silence, reverberating like a judgment. "Emily, Mother mentioned the school pickups today. You were late again?" His tone carried no real question, only the echo of Margaret's planting, his eyes darting between them like a man navigating a minefield he couldn't disarm, each step fraught with peril. Heat flushed Emily's cheeks, a slow burn that spread to her chest, constricting her breath until it came in shallow gasps. She wanted to snap back, to declare the errands she juggled alone while Margaret critiqued from the sidelines, her voice a distant drone of judgment. But the words lodged in her throat, choked by the fear of fracturing the fragile peace that held them all together, barely. It was traffic, she managed, her voice thin, unraveling like frayed thread. The boys were fine. Margaret's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes, cold and calculated, her fork spearing a carrot with deliberate precision, the crunch audible in the tense air. Of course they were, but details matter, dear. David knows that. He's always been so reliable. She turned to him, her insecurity masked as wisdom, the shadow of her own fractured marriages fueling this quiet siege that eroded Emily's foundations. David's passivity won again. He nodded faintly, avoiding Emily's pleading stare, the rift widening with each averted glance, a chasm growing in the dim light. The clock on the wall ticked onward, each second amplifying the oppression, the plates growing colder as accusations simmered unspoken, their heat rising invisibly. Emily's pulse thrummed in her ears, a helpless rhythm against the tide of their combined inertia that pulled her under. She pushed back her chair, the scrape of futile protest against the inevitable. But no one moved to stop her retreat into the shadowed hallway, where the house's walls seemed to close in, indifferent to her unraveling grasp on the life she'd fought to build. Now slipping away like sand. Hours dragged on in suffocating silence after the tea, the afternoon light fading into twilight's heavy pall that draped the house like a shroud. Emily's chest tightened with mounting anxiety, Margaret's barb festering like a hidden wound beneath her composed facade, pulsing with each heartbeat. By evening, as the dining table was set with rigid precision, the air thickened with unspoken dread, the fragile peace poised to shatter under the weight of simmering resentments that had brewed too long. The fork clattered against the porcelain plate, its sharp ping shattering the fragile truce of the dining room like fragile ice. Emily's hand froze mid-air, the utensil slipping from her grip, as Margaret's latest barb landed like a fresh incision, precise and deep. "Darling, if you'd just let me handle the roast next time, we wouldn't have this dryness. It's like chewing leather, practical, but hardly appetizing." Margaret's smile curved thin and triumphant, her knife sawing methodically through the overcooked meat, portioning slices with the precision of a surgeon dissecting weakness, the blade scrape a grating whisper. David shifted in his chair, the wooden legs scraping softly against the rug, his eyes darting between the two women, like a referee awaiting a foul in a game he never wanted to play. He cleared his throat, voice low and conciliatory, laced with the strain of mediation. "It's fine, really. The potatoes are perfect, Em. Let's just eat." His fork speared a limp vegetable, but he didn't lift it to his mouth, the food congealing under the chandelier's dim glow, its crystals casting fractured light like broken promises. Sweat beaded at his temple, a silent testament to the knots twisting in his gut. He could feel the rift widening, his mother's voice pulling one way, his wife's silence yanking the other, tearing him apart. Emily's pulse throbbed in her ears, a relentless drumbeat drowning the clink of silverware, each beat echoing her mounting fury. She stared at her plate, the congealed gravy pooling like accusation, dark and viscous, Margaret's words echoing the afternoon's tea spill. Unchecked chaos that mirrored her life. All day the undermining had woven tighter. First the laundry folded, properly, in Emily's drawers, stiff and unfamiliar, then the grocery list rewritten with Margaret's corrections. Each intrusion a thread binding Emily's hands in invisible restraint. Now, at this table meant for their family, it coiled around her throat, tightening with every breath. Independence? It felt like a joke. Her home morphing into Margaret's domain, David's passivity, the lock sealing it shut, cold and unyielding. Perfect? Emily's voice emerged sharper than intended, slicing the hush with an edge honed by resentment. She set her napkin down, the fabric whispering against the tablecloth like a sigh of defeat. "You think this is about potatoes, David? Or the roast?" Her gaze locked on him, resentment bubbling up like bile, hot and acidic. Margaret paused, fork hovering, her eyes gleaming with feigned surprise. But Emily pressed on, the words tumbling free in a rush she couldn't stem, fueled by the slow poison of months. She's been doing this for months, rewriting our life, piece by piece. And you just sit there, letting her. Like I'm the child who can't pour tea without spilling. David's face paled, the fork dropping from his fingers with a muted thud that reverberated through the tension. That's not... I was just trying to keep things calm. Hurt flickered in his eyes, raw and unguarded, mirroring the fear gnawing at him. The family fracturing under his inaction. His mother's shadow and his wife's fire both scorching him from within. Margaret leaned forward, her voice a silken coil, wrapping tighter. Now, Emily. No need for dramatics. David's right. Harmony is everything. But her satisfaction hung in the air, thick as the scent of overdone herbs, her control flexing like a muscle long atrophied from disuse, now revived in the dim light. Emily's chest tightened, breath shallow and ragged, the room's walls pressing inward with suffocating force. Anxiety clawed up her spine. Had she gone too far? David's wounded stare bored into her, the resentment she'd unleashed now a mirror reflecting her own shadows. The authority she craved slipping away, harmony shattering like that fork's echo, irretrievable. The dinner lay in ruins, untouched portions cooling into indifference, the conflict no longer simmering but boiling over, inescapable and scorching. She reached for her water glass, fingers unsteady, trembling against the cool surface. But even that small motion felt like surrender in the oppressive weight of their stares, unyielding and judgmental. The clatter hung in the air like a verdict, Emily's exposed pulse throbbing in the ensuing hush that smothered the room. Hours blurred into a suffocating vigil at the table's edge, the half-eaten meal congealing under the chandelier's merciless glow, its light harsh and unforgiving. Isolation coiled around her chest, each shallow breath amplifying the fractures spiderwebbing through the family's facade. Vulnerabilities she'd unwittingly bared, now festering into irreparable rifts, dread settling like lead in her veins, heavy and immobilizing. I shouldn't have said it. The words hang in my throat like bile, unspoken, yet already poisoning the air with their bitter aftertaste. My hand hovers over the tablecloth, fingers curling into the crisp linen as if it could anchor me. But everything tilts now, the dining room warping into this suffocating cage where shadows cling to every corner. Margaret's eyes narrow, her fork pausing midway to her mouth, a sliver of overcooked beef dangling from its tines like a precarious threat. What did you just imply, Emily? That I'm meddling? Her voice slices through the silence, polished and precise, but I catch the tremor beneath, like a fault line cracking her porcelain facade, faint but undeniable. She sets the fork down with deliberate care, the clink echoing off the walls, amplifying the pulse in my ears until it drowns out all else. David shifts beside me, his knee brushing mine under the table in a silent plea, warm but fleeting. Don't, his touch says, the warmth of his hand fleeting as he reaches for his wine glass instead, swirling the deep red liquid without drinking, its surface rippling like disturbed calm. His face stays neutral, but I see the strain in the way his shoulders hunch, caught between us like a man on a fraying tightrope, one misstep from the fall. I implied nothing, I force out, my voice thinner than I intend, scraping against the dryness in my mouth that tastes of ash. The roast scent lingers, greasy and cloying, mixing with the faint metallic tang of my rising panic that coats my tongue. But you can't keep doing this, picking at every little thing, like it's your right to carve us up. The confession spills before I can stopper it, raw edges of old wounds tearing open, the endless critiques on my parenting, the subtle digs at my career choices, all veiled as concern that now feels like chains. Years of swallowing them, and now they flood out, hot and unfiltered, burning as they go. Margaret leans back, her necklace, a heavy gold chain that always seems to weigh her down, catching the chandelier's dim glow and mocking sparks. Carve you up? Oh, darling, if only you saw how fragile you make yourself. Always the victim, aren't you? I built this family long before you waltzed in. Her laugh is a brittle thing, masking the flicker in her gaze, the fear of irrelevance she buries under layers of command that now crack like thin ice. But I see it, and it fuels me. This glimpse of her own fractures, raw and exposed in the flickering light. David clears his throat, the sound wet and hesitant, caught in his chest. "Emily, please. Mom, let's just—" He stops, words dissolving as Margaret waves him off, her hand slicing the air like a dismissal he's too conditioned to fight, the motion sharp and final. Too late, the dam breaks fully. "You built nothing but resentment," I whisper, louder than I mean, the admission landing like a slap that echoes in the heavy air. Vulnerability exposed, my chest caves, the room's walls pressing in with the weight of their stares, unblinking and accusatory. David's hand withdraws entirely, leaving my leg cold and exposed, a chill that seeps deeper. Margaret's lips part, but no retort comes. Only a stony silence that stretches, accusing, thicker than the shadows pooling around us. I crossed it. That invisible line I'd towed for years, the one holding our fragile peace like a threadbare veil. Now, the fracture spiderwebs outward. David's averted eyes, Margaret's rigid posture, the untouched plates cooling into indifference that mocks our efforts. Isolation coils around me, thick as the napkin twisting in my lap, severing me from them both. No alliance, no retreat, just this hollow echo in my core, where harmony once pretended to thrive, now hollow and echoing. The chandelier hums faintly overhead, indifferent to the ruin below, and I sit trapped in its light, utterly alone, the dread settling like dust. The dinner dissolved into a haze of clinking silverware and averted gazes, the air thick with unspoken venom that lingered like smoke. Hours bled into the night, the house's shadows lengthening like accusatory fingers, pointing at her every flaw. Emily retreated to her room, the door clicking shut behind her, a fragile barrier against the oppression seeping through the walls, cold and insistent. Dread settled in her bones, a slow, insidious chill, urging her toward the one secret sanctuary that might restore her fractured will, if only for a moment. That's when I realized the poison wasn't just in my throat. It seeped from her every calculated word, twisting through the years like roots under our feet, unseen but unyielding. Margaret's smile lingered across the table, a porcelain mask etched with faint lines that betrayed nothing, or perhaps everything, in their subtle depth. The clink of her fork against the china plate echoed too sharply in the dim-lit dining room, each tap a deliberate rhythm meant to drown out the silence I'd been feeding, growing heavier by the second. "Emily, dear," she said, her voice smooth as the cream she'd just stirred into her tea, swirling lazily. "You've been so quiet tonight. Surely the roast isn't that disappointing. Or is it the company?" Her eyes, sharp behind the wire-rimmed glasses, flicked to David, then back to me, inviting alliance, demanding it with that unyielding stare. David shifted in his chair, the wood creaking under his weight like a reluctant confession pulled from hiding. He cleared his throat, fork midway to his mouth, suspended in that familiar limbo where choices loomed. "Mother, it's fine. Everything's fine. Emily's just tired from the drive." His gaze darted to me, pleading, "Don't push. Don't shatter this fragile evening we'd all agreed to pretend was normal," the air already thick with pretense. But his passivity only amplified the weight pressing on my chest. The way his avoidance had let her words burrow deeper, year after year, like parasites feeding on doubt. I set my glass down, the cool condensation slick against my palm, leaving damp trails, and felt the linen napkin crumple under my grip, its folds bunching like clenched fists. No more. The bile rose again, but this time I let it fuel me, hot and defiant. "It's not the company, Margaret. It's you. Always you, with your little digs wrapped in concern. Like when you rearranged my kitchen last month, calling it helping, but really just marking your territory." My voice cracked on the last word, low and unsteady, but it hung there, unbroken, slicing the air. She blinked, once, twice, her fork pausing midair, suspended like a threat. The steam from the untouched potatoes curled lazily between us, carrying the faint, acrid scent of overcooked herbs, like regret left too long on the stove, simmering into bitterness. Marking territory? Oh, Emily, you're imagining things. I only wanted to make things easier for you. David knows I mean well. She turned to him, expectant, her posture straightening, as if to reclaim the room's gravity, pulling it toward her. David's face paled, his knuckles whitening around his knife, the metal cool and unyielding. Emily, let's not— No. The words sliced through, sharper than I'd intended, and for a moment, the chandelier's crystals caught the light, fracturing it into cold, splintered shards on the walls that mirrored my breaking resolve. You've always done this, haven't you? Whispering doubts into his ear, making me feel like an intruder in my own home. The way you questioned my choices with the baby, or how you forgot to invite me to family decisions. It's control, Margaret, not love. Her lips thinned, the mask fracturing just enough, a twitch at the corner of her mouth, eyes narrowing to slits that gleamed with suppressed fury. Insecurity flickered there, raw and unguarded, before she smoothed it over with a forced laugh that rang hollow. Such dramatics. If you'd just listen more, you'd see. But I couldn't listen anymore. The room's walls seemed to lean inward, the grandfather clock in the hall ticking with a metronome's insistence, counting down to something irreversible, each talk a hammer blow. David's silence stretched, heavy as the velvet curtains blocking the night outside. His fear of the rift mirroring my own dread of what came next, cold and coiling. Yet beneath it, resentment uncoiled, hot and insistent, pushing against the suffocating weight. As the argument sputtered into uneasy quiet, Margaret's retorts laced with venom that stung like nettles, David's murmurs futile and fading, I pushed back from the table. My chair scraped against the polished floor, a grating sound that echoed in my bones, raw and final. Upstairs, in the attic trunk where no one looked, my journal waited. Its leather cover a sanctuary of scribbled truths, worn and familiar. Tonight, I'd unearth it. I'd pour out every scar she'd inflicted, reclaim the voice she'd tried to silence with her endless judgments. And tomorrow, I'd confront her fully. No more masks to hide behind. The dread coiled tighter in my gut, a shadow promising upheaval. But for the first time, it felt like mine to wield, sharp and unapologetic. 3 days later, the poison's roots had spread unseen, coiling through her days like invisible vines that strangled her every breath. Unease settled in her chest, a constant weight under the oppressive hush of the house that muffled sounds and amplified doubts. Margaret's porcelain smile haunted the edges of her vision, even in solitude, a ghostly presence that refused to fade. As she rifled through the family planner on the kitchen counter, the rearranged blocks of time stared back. Subtle fractures, widening the gaps between her and them. Ink bleeding like wounds. The calendar app pinged on Emily's phone, a sterile chime slicing through the murmur of the family dinner, like an unwelcome intruder. Her fingers hovering over the screen, tracing the shifted blocks of time. David's late meetings now overlapping her yoga class, the kids' soccer practices slotted into her volunteer shifts. Each change a deliberate cut. It yanked her back 3 days, to that dinner table where Margaret's fork had paused midair, her eyes glinting like polished obsidian as she suggested, ever so helpfully, that Emily might want to step back from the school committee to focus on family priorities. The words had lodged then, a splinter under skin, festering with infection. Now, in the dim glow of the chandelier above the oak table, Emily's pulse quickened, a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The room smelled of rosemary and overcooked lamb, the kind Margaret insisted on because it reminded her of simpler times. Its gaminess heavy and cloying. David sat beside her, carving slices with deliberate care, his knife scraping plate like a whispered apology that fell on deaf ears. He glanced her way, brows furrowed in that familiar conflict, wanting to bridge the gap, yet fearing the fallout that loomed like storm clouds. "Everything all right?" he murmured, passing the platter, its weight solid in his hands. Emily nodded, but her gaze fixed on Margaret across the table. The older woman's hands folded neatly, rings catching the light like tiny sentinels guarding her domain. The schedule changes weren't accidents. Emily had pieced it together this afternoon. Scrolling through shared family links Margaret had updated without a word, her digital fingerprints everywhere. Playdates rerouted to afternoons when Emily worked. David's evenings cleared for grandma time with the kids. Subtle erosions, carving her out piece by piece, leaving her adrift. Isolation dressed as convenience, its disguise thin and cracking. Why the changes, Margaret? Emily's voice emerged steady, though her throat tightened around the question, squeezing like a vice. She set her phone down, screen still lit with the damning grid that glowed accusingly. The kids, oblivious at the far end, chattered over peas, their laughter a fragile counterpoint to the tension coiling beneath. Margaret's smile didn't falter, but her fingers unclasped, one thumb tracing the edge of her napkin with feigned casualness. Changes? Oh, darling, just streamlining things. You seemed so overwhelmed last week. Her tone wrapped concern like velvet over steel, eyes flicking to David for alliance, pulling him into her orbit. She leaned forward, voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. I thought it would help. Give you space to breathe. David shifted, fork midway to his mouth, the utensil hovering uncertainly. Mom, did you run that by Emily? His words hung, laced with that passive edge, the one that always diffused rather than ignited, diffusing the spark before it could flame. He wanted honesty, craved it, but the rift loomed in his mind's eye. Emily pulling away, Margaret fading into irrelevance, both outcomes a shadow over his peace. Space? Emily echoed, the word bitter on her tongue, tasting of betrayal. Heat bloomed in her chest, years of deference cracking like dry earth under pressure. The manipulations surfaced now, vivid. The forgotten invitations to family outings, the sidelong comments planting doubt in David's ear like seeds in fertile soil. Her independence, hard-won after the divorce scare, frayed under this quiet siege that wore her down relentlessly. Or are you just making sure I'm the one left out? Margaret's composure slipped, a micro-flinch, lips pressing thin into a line of restrained fury. Vulnerability flickered in her eyes, the shadow of her own losses, a husband gone, children distant, echoing in the hollows of her gaze. But resistance surged back, her chin lifting defiantly. That's uncalled for. I'm only trying to keep this family together. Her voice sharpened, the mask fracturing, revealing the fear beneath, losing her grip, becoming the outsider in the home she'd claimed. David reached for Emily's hand under the table, squeezing once, his conflict etching lines around his mouth like scars. The kids fell quiet, sensing the shift in the air, thick and electric. Emily held Margaret's stare, the air thickening with unspoken accusations, each breath pulling her deeper into the unease. A slow unraveling, where harmony's illusion dissolved into the raw ache of betrayal that pulsed between them. The dinner plates cooled untouched, the weight of secrets pressing down like an uninvited guest, heavy and inescapable. That night, as the house settled into uneasy silence, Emily lingered at the kitchen table, the phone's glow casting shadows across her face, harsh and revealing. The overlaps in the schedule twisted like secrets in her mind, each rescheduled block fueling a creeping suspicion. David's meetings, the kids' practices, all edging her out into the cold margins. Dread coiled in her chest, oppressive and unyielding, a serpent squeezing tighter. By dawn, resolve hardened. She couldn't let it slip away, not without a stand. The ink's sharp bite lingered on Emily's fingertips as she smoothed the printed sheets across the kitchen table, the calendar's grid stark under the pendant light's unforgiving glare that stripped away illusions. Blocks of color marked her yoga sessions in teal, the kids' practices in green. Her life, finally etched in permanence amid the family's chaos, bold against the white. Dinner's remnants had been cleared hours ago, but the faint grease of Margaret's roast clung to the air, a greasy reminder of the evening's forced pleasantries that masked deeper wounds. David entered first, sleeves rolled up from some half-finished email on his laptop, the screen's blue light fading from his face. His eyes flicked to the pages, then to her, curiosity warring with caution. "What's this?" he asked, voice tentative, as if stepping onto thin ice that might crack beneath him. Emily straightened, her pulse a steady thrum against her ribs, insistent and unyielding. "Our schedule. All of it. Not just the kids or your meetings, mine too." She tapped the teal blocks, the paper crinkling under her nail. "I blocked out my volunteer shifts, the writing group. No more overlaps without talking first." Margaret followed, her slippers whispering against the linoleum like secrets uncoiling in the quiet. A teacup cradled in her hands like a shield against intrusion. Steam curled from it, carrying the bitter edge of chamomile that soured the air. She paused at the table's edge, gaze narrowing on the calendar with predatory focus. "Another list? We've managed fine without all this fuss." "It's not fuss," Emily said, words measured, though frustration coiled low in her gut like a spring wound tight. She wanted harmony, not war, yet here they were, the invisible strings of Margaret's approvals pulling taut again, straining against her efforts. "It's balance. I need space for me, or everything unravels." David pulled out a chair, sitting between them like a reluctant referee in a ring closing in. "She's right, Mom. We've been squeezing Emily out without realizing. Open communication. That's what we need." His tone aimed for evenness, but his fingers drummed the table's edge, betraying the rift he dreaded carving deeper, each tap a echo of his inner turmoil. Margaret set her cup down with a porcelain clink, too deliberate, the sound sharp in the hushed space. Her lips thinned, eyes tracing the grid as if it were a map to betrayal, her breath shallow. "Balance," she echoed, voice laced with something brittle, cracking at the edges. "You think I don't know about losing yourself? I raised David alone after his father, after everything fell apart. I controlled what I could, because chaos, it devours." The words slipped out, unbidden, her hand hovering over a faded scar on her wrist, hidden beneath a bracelet, its texture rough under her touch. "Past failures," Emily realized, with a chill that seeped into her veins. Margaret's marriage in ruins, her relevance stripped away in empty rooms that echoed with loss. Suspicion bloomed in Emily's chest, cold and insidious, like frost creeping over glass. Was this why the subtle rearrangements, the helpful suggestions that eroded her days? Not malice, but a desperate grip on fading power, born from Margaret's own unraveling life that mirrored her own fears. Emily's resentment stirred, shadowed by her own fear of confrontation. She could walk away, preserve the peace, but the truth hung there, exposed and ugly, demanding reckoning. David shifted, caught in the crossfire of loyalties. "Mom, we get it. But holding on like this, it pushes us away." His passivity cracked, just a fraction, urging honesty even as he braced for the fallout that shadowed his every word. Margaret's gaze lifted, vulnerable now, resistance fracturing like thin ice. "Irrelevant. That's what I'll be, isn't it? Just the old woman in the corner." Her voice cracked, the admission a raw wound, motivations laid bare in the oppressive quiet that smothered the room, thick and unbreathable. Emily met her eyes, dread settling like lead in her stomach, heavy and sinking. The calendar lay between them, no longer just paper, but a mirror to the toxicities festering beneath their fragile harmony, reflecting back the darkness they'd ignored. Suspicion lingered, whispering of deeper fractures yet to break, each one a step toward collapse. As twilight bled into the kitchen's corners, Emily's triumph curdled into a gnawing unease, the calendar's neat blocks suddenly fragile under the weight of unseen fractures that threatened to shatter them. She clutched the sheets like a talisman against the encroaching dark, her footsteps echoing hollowly toward the living room, where lamplight pooled oppressively, shadows lengthening like accusations that clawed at her heels. Dread coiled in her chest, a slow venom, as she approached the murmured conversation. her ordered world teetering on the edge of familiar discord, one wrong word from the abyss. The echo of agreement that should have followed Emily's words, but didn't, hanging instead like an unfulfilled promise. She slid the calendar across the scarred oak surface, its edges curling slightly from the printer's heat, toward David. His chair creaked as he leaned forward, eyes scanning the teal blocks of her yoga slots, the green streaks for the children's soccer, the colors vivid against the worn wood. The kitchen smelled of cooling chamomile tea, steam long dissipated, leaving only the faint herbal bitterness clinging to the mugs like a persistent stain. Emily's pulse thrummed in her ears, a quiet insistence against the room's stillness that pressed in, heavy and expectant. See? This way, we all know what's coming. No more overlaps, no more scrambling. Her voice carried a thread of hope, fragile as the paper under his gaze, trembling on the edge. She watched his face, searching for the spark of partnership they'd lost somewhere in the shuffle of days, buried under layers of avoidance. David's fork paused midway to his mouth, a limp strand of pasta dangling precariously. He set it down, the clink sharp in the quiet, cutting through like a verdict. It's structured. I like that you're taking the lead on this, Em. But his tone wavered, eyes flicking sideways, as if already bracing for the undercurrent that swirled beneath, dark and pulling. From the shadowed alcove by the pantry, Margaret emerged, her slippers whispering against the linoleum, like secrets uncoiling in the dim light. She hadn't been there a moment ago, or had she? Always present, yet somehow invisible until the moment to strike, her form materializing like a specter. Her hands, veined and steady, gripped the back of an empty chair. A calendar. How quaint. The words dripped slow, each syllable measured, landing like weights on the table, pressing down. All those colors, like a child's coloring book. Practical? In this house? You'll be rewriting it by week's end. Mark my words. Emily's breath caught, a hollow pull in her chest that left her reeling. She forced her gaze to hold Margaret's, those pale eyes narrowed behind wire-rimmed glasses, reflecting nothing back but cold judgment. It's not about perfection, Margaret. It's about boundaries. Mine. David shifted, his knee brushing Emily's under the table. A fleeting anchor, then gone, leaving her adrift. Mom, let's not dismiss it outright. Emily's put thought into this. We could try it, see how it fits. His words aimed for calm, but they fractured at the edges, pleading more than commanding, the strain evident in his tightening jaw. He glanced between them, the lines around his mouth deepening, as if the air itself pressed him smaller, compressing his resolve. Margaret's laugh came low, not mirthful, but a rasp from some buried place deep within, raw and echoing. She pulled out the chair, sat with deliberate slowness, her elbows planting on the wood like roots claiming territory, unmovable. Boundaries, that's what you call it? In my day, we called it selfishness. I raised David without all this fuss. Schedules that bent to life, not the other way around. Her fingers traced the calendar's edge, not touching, but hovering, possessive, a threat in the air. A tremor betrayed her then, faint, in the way her nail caught the paper's corner, snagging like her fraying control. You think this makes you free? It'll just show you how fragile it all is. The children need stability, not your fleeting whims. And David? He's always needed guidance, even if he won't admit it. The words hung, unraveling something raw in the dim light. Emily saw it then. In the flicker of Margaret's averted gaze, the subtle hunch of shoulders, not just control, but a desperate grip on relevance, clawing against the void. Past failures echoed there, whispers of a marriage crumbled, children who drifted like leaves in autumn wind, leaving her isolated. Margaret's life, a ledger of losses she masked with commands, now cracking under the weight of Emily's quiet rebellion that challenged her throne. David's hand reached for Emily's, but stopped short, suspended in the space between, fingers trembling. Fear coiled in her gut, cold and insistent, not just of the discord blooming like a dark flower, but of the rift it promised, wide enough to swallow the fragile harmony she'd clawed for, inch by inch. Margaret's eyes met hers again, vulnerable beneath the armor, pleading in silence. "Don't make me disappear." The kitchen walls seemed to lean in, the calendar a battlefield where truths bled slow, staining everything it touched with the red of unspoken pain. The silence stretched like a taut wire in the dim kitchen, David's gaze lingering on the calendar's unyielding grid, offering no balm to the sting of his inaction that burned like acid. Hours bled into a restless night, Emily's thoughts coiling tighter around the invisible sabotage woven by her mother-in-law's meddling hand, each thread a noose. By dawn, the frustration had festered into a cold resolve, her pulse a steady drumbeat of unspoken grievances, propelling her toward the confrontation that loomed like a gathering storm, thunder rumbling in the distance. Outside, the distant rumble of a delivery truck grinding gears on the street, a low growl intruding on the hush. Inside, Emily's breath, ragged and insistent, filling the kitchen like steam from a forgotten kettle, building pressure. She watched Margaret's hand hover over the calendar, not quite touching it, as if the printed blocks of color were accusations etched in ink, damning and permanent. David's eyes flicked between them, the creak of his chair a small surrender as he pushed back slightly, wood protesting. The oak table bore faint rings from years of spilled coffee, each one a silent witness to meals that had soured into silences, marking time's toll. "Look at this," Emily said, her voice slicing through the room's stale warmth, finger jabbing at a teal slot overwritten in Margaret's precise cursive, the ink bold and intrusive. "Yoga at 6, but you've scribbled dinner prep right over it. Again." Margaret straightened, her silver bracelet clinking against the table's edge, a sound like brittle glass on the verge of shattering. Her lips parted, then pressed into a line, tight with restraint. "It's practical, Emily. The children need structure. You can't just flit from one thing to the next." "Flit?" Emily's laugh came out sharp, edged with something raw that clawed at her throat. She leaned forward, the wood cool under her palms, grounding her as heat rose in her chest, flushing her skin. "This is my schedule, Margaret. Mine. Not yours to rewrite because it doesn't fit your idea of what a wife should be." David cleared his throat, his fingers drumming a hesitant rhythm on the armrest, unsteady. "Let's talk this out. No one's rewriting anything permanently." But his words hung there, thin, unable to bridge the widening gap that yawned between them. He wanted harmony, the kind that smoothed over cracks without forcing them open. Yet the pull of Emily's frustration tugged at him, mirroring his own buried unease that simmered beneath. Margaret's eyes narrowed, the lines around them deepening like cracks in porcelain under strain. "You think I do this to control you? After everything I've given up?" Her voice cracked, not with apology, but with a tremor that betrayed the armor, raw edges showing. She glanced at David, seeking an ally, but found only his averted gaze, heavy with conflict. "I built this family when my own fell apart. My husband, gone before he could see sense. I won't watch it unravel because of schedules and selfishness." Emily's pulse thrummed in her ears, louder than the truck's fading growl outside, drowning all else. "Selfishness? You've been undermining me since the wedding. The helpful suggestions that turn into demands. It's not about the kids. It's about you not letting go." The words spilled out, fueled by years of swallowed retorts, her hands clenching until her nails bit into skin, sharp pinpricks of pain. She saw it then, in Margaret's faltering posture, the flicker of something unguarded, not just resistance, but a hollow fear, the shadow of a woman who'd lost her grip on relevance long before this table, echoing her own dreads. David shifted, his chair groaning again under the weight. "Mom, Emily's right. We need to hear each other." But even as he spoke, doubt laced his tone, the fear of fracturing the fragile peace knotting his gut tighter. Margaret's face flushed,